Hello everyone. Today, I want to present a case that, at first glance, seemed very straightforward. However, it took a significant twist. What happened to the mother of three, Juanita Richardson, seemed like an ordinary accident, but thanks to the tireless work of investigators, it was revealed that the truth was much darker. If you'd like to know the details of this story, I invite you to keep watching. First, we need to move to the town of McBain, a small farming town in Michigan, located 186 miles from the cliffs at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. In June 2006, Juanita and Tom Richardson were preparing to celebrate their 23rd wedding anniversary. The couple had two daughters, Lacine and Lindsay, and one son, Levi. They were considered a happy family, and despite their long relationship, Tom and Juanita still seemed like an ideal, loving couple. The Richardsons lived in a log cabin built by Tom. He made a living driving a truck for FedEx and also taught youth classes at church. Juanita worked as a secretary at a school and sang in the choir. The couple decided to spend their anniversary at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, a true paradise for tourists. The 40 miles of rocky coastline along Lake Superior, the largest, deepest and coldest of the Great Lakes, offer breathtaking and unique views. Tom and Juanita chose this place because it held special memories for them. It was where they had their first trip together many years ago. This was meant to be a return to those wonderful memories from the early days of their marriage. Tom even referred to it as their second honeymoon. Their time together was meant to be a break from daily life. They both loved spending time outdoors and the thrill of adventure. The park seemed like the perfect place, challenging trails, treacherous rocks, but also views that would take your breath away. On June 22, 2006, the fourth day of their vacation, the Richardsons went on their first hike. It was a cloudy, misty morning, and Juanita was taking photos as they walked along the trail. Around 10:30 a.m., they reached the cliffs and admired the views. They stopped for a snack and a rest. Juanita took a photo of Tom sitting on a grassy patch, exactly in their favorite spot. A short while later, Tom went to the nearby restroom at the visitor center, leaving Juanita alone. The account of what happened next comes from Tom. He claimed that when he returned, his wife was no longer where he had left her. He began looking around and calling her name, but received no response. She was nowhere in sight, so he decided to contact the park authorities. The rangers began the search, but there was no sign of what had happened to Juanita. It seemed as though she had simply vanished into thin air, and there were several possible explanations. The most optimistic theory suggested that Juanita simply wandered away from the meeting spot with her husband and would return shortly. She might have decided to take a short walk and lost her sense of direction. On the other hand, it couldn't be ruled out that she fell from the cliff, was attacked by a bear, or was kidnapped. The search operation lasted 45 minutes and ultimately revealed the tragic fate of the 43-year-old woman. Unfortunately, it was not the positive outcome her family had hoped for. Juanita's body was found at the foot of a 43-meter, 141-foot cliff. She had no chance of surviving the fall, as it was equivalent to falling from a window on the 14th floor. Later, the autopsy confirmed what was already suspected. The cause of death was injuries sustained from the fall. Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore has existed since 1966 and spans an area of colourful sandstone cliffs, waterfalls, natural arches and dunes along the shores of Lake Superior. The park attracts nearly 400,000 visitors annually and, until this incident, had never seen such a tragedy. Juanita was the first person to fall from its cliffs. The incident was considered an unfortunate accident. Though it was an isolated case, the cliffs, while beautiful, could be extremely dangerous, especially if one lost their balance near the edge. A moment of inattention could cost someone their life. There were no witnesses to Juanita's fall, but the case initially seemed straightforward. Tom was devastated by what had happened, and his face showed clear signs of anguish and grief. After initial questioning and a 4-hour drive home, he had to tell his children that they would never see their mother again. He was broken-hearted, but had to be strong for his kids. This tragedy seemed to bring them closer together, and during the funeral service, the three of them stood hand in hand. Meanwhile, investigators were securing the scene and examining the circumstances, but the case appeared to be a simple one, just an unfortunate accident. However, the investigation would likely have been closed quickly if not for some inconsistencies that began to emerge over time. Tom was questioned several times regarding his wife's death, and surprisingly, he changed his version of events 3 times. The first time, he said that when he returned from the restroom, his wife wasn't where he had left her. However, he later changed this version and claimed she was there. When she saw him, she jumped off the cliff, intentionally taking her own life. He then changed his story again, stating that he found Juanita at the edge of the cliff, but she fell accidentally while trying to show him something. These 3 versions differed drastically from each other, and yet the truth could only be one. So the police directed their suspicions towards Tom. In 2 of the 3 versions, Tom was present at the time of the tragedy and was a direct witness. Investigators began to question whether he might have been the perpetrator as well. The decision was made to take a closer look at the relationship between Tom and Juanita, and it was revealed that their marriage wasn't as perfect as it had seemed. Friends, acquaintances, and family members of the Richardsons were thoroughly questioned. The most significant information came from the family. It turned out that, contrary to what others believed, Tom and Juanita frequently argued, and Juanita even confided in her closest ones that she was considering a divorce. The reasons behind these arguments were deeper than just petty disagreements. It was discovered that Tom was having an affair with one of his acquaintances, Kelly. As the investigation progressed, Tom shifted from being seen as a grieving husband to the primary suspect. More and more evidence seemed to go against him. During questioning, however, he denied having an affair with Kelly. He claimed that she was just a friend with whom he shared platonic relations. He stated that they had much in common because both were deeply religious, and during all their meetings they only talked about the Bible. Phone records revealed that Tom had called Kelly 383 times in less than 9 months. Additionally, it was discovered that Tom regularly reassured his friend that his wife would soon die from cancer. While it was true that Juanita had been diagnosed with a tumour some time earlier, it was benign, and there was no indication that her death was imminent. On the contrary, judging by the energy she had and her eagerness to go on hikes, it appeared she was in very good health. The police also suspected that Tom might have been involved in domestic abuse, but in this regard he had the full support of his children, who claimed that he treated their mother well. Despite this, the evidence gathered by the investigators painted Tom in a very negative light. Everything pointed to the fact that he had played a direct role in the death of his wife. However, what ultimately convinced the detectives of his guilt was the discovery of a motive. The investigators wondered if he was trying to replace his wife with his mistress, but the truth turned out to be much more mundane. The motive was money. Detectives found that Juanita's life insurance policies would bring Tom nearly $250,000. This wasn't enough to make him wealthy, but it would allow him to pay off the debts he had incurred while building their house. The total debt amounted to $243,000, while the insurance policy would provide him with $235,000. On February 6, 2007, Tom was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution claimed that he had premeditatedly taken his wife's life to gain financial benefits. During the trial, Tom was questioned multiple times, and each time he maintained his innocence. He insisted that he loved his wife and would never harm her. His defense team argued that the insurance policy, which was allegedly the motive for the crime, originally covered a much smaller amount. Additionally, there was no hard evidence against Tom, only circumstantial clues and assumptions. As an argument for the incident being an unfortunate accident, Juanita's medical record was presented. It showed that she had suffered a series of leg injuries which left her with permanent instability in her left knee. Therefore, it could not be ruled out that while near the cliff, she simply lost her balance and fell. As I mentioned earlier, Tom had changed his version of the events that tragic day several times. Ultimately, it was established that he was indeed a direct witness, and during questioning, he described his experience. In his initial statements, he claimed to have witnessed her fall accidentally after she smiled, turned away from him, and slipped. He described seeing her feet briefly in the air and hearing her last words, possibly, "Oh my God." He maintained that he was overcome by grief and distress, even fainting after the incident due to shock and his fear of heights. Despite the lack of concrete evidence proving Tom's guilt, the prosecution didn't back down. They were able to establish that shortly before their trip, Tom had convinced his wife to make a will. The lawyer who handled it testified that he was surprised that someone would urgently need a will just before a short trip to the mountains. According to the will, Tom was to inherit everything from his wife, along with the life insurance money. Investigators also focused on proving that his relationship with Kelly wasn't purely platonic, but rather involved an affair. However, this proved to be a significant challenge, as Kelly herself claimed they were just friends who often discussed the Bible during their night shifts at work. One particular conversation caught the investigators' attention. It took place on June 21st, the day before the tragedy, and lasted 13 minutes. According to Kelly, they had only discussed the Bible during this call as well. Because Kelly was not a suspect in this case, she could not be forced to provide more detailed or possibly more truthful testimony. There was simply nothing more that could be done. What was established was that in addition to speaking with Tom frequently, Kelly also received regular gifts from him. 6 months earlier, for Christmas, she had received a pair of earrings, and shortly after the death of his wife, Tom appeared at her home with another gift, a plant from his wife's memorial service. It was a highly unusual gesture for someone who had just lost a beloved partner after over 2 decades of marriage. Despite the investigators' pressure, Kelly maintained her version of events, and the phone calls and small gifts were not enough to confirm their relationship as a romantic one, which could be considered a motive for the crime. Tom consistently maintained his innocence, asserting that he had no role in his wife Juanita's death. He claimed that he deeply loved her and would never harm her. Tom stated that he and Juanita were experiencing a strong period in their marriage and that there was no plan to replace her with someone else. He explained that any suggestion of a premeditated plan was false, including the idea that he was motivated by money or a potential future relationship with his colleague, Kelly Brophy. Tom has acknowledged that his statements to investigators may have varied, but he attributed these changes to the shock and trauma he felt following the incident, not to deception. He argued that he was genuinely devastated by her death, and that he would never purposefully endanger her life. Shock and stress can impact the memory of witnesses, and especially the memory of the victim. Throughout the trial, Tom had the full support of his children. All 3 stood by their father and insisted that he would never harm their mother. This undoubtedly influenced how the jury saw the defendant. On the other hand, Juanita's parents and her sister were convinced of Tom's guilt. The defense attorney ended his closing statement by describing the investigation into Tom as a rush to judge an innocent man who loved his wife. He claimed that there was not a single piece of evidence pointing to his guilt, which was even confirmed by the prosecutors themselves. The prosecution acknowledged that there were no direct, irrefutable pieces of evidence in this case, but the number of circumstantial ones was overwhelming. Jeanette Ellens, Juanita Richardson's sister, played a significant role in the investigation. Jeanette reportedly testified about her concerns regarding Tom Richardson's treatment of Juanita and the growing tensions between the couple. She mentioned instances suggesting Tom's volatile behavior, which included verbal altercations with Juanita, often about finances, and his alleged close relationship with another woman. These accounts helped law enforcement consider Tom as a suspect, contrasting his claims that Juanita's death was accidental. In court, Jeanette made a highly emotional statement directed at Tom. She openly expressed her devastation and anger, calling him a coward, and expressing profound sorrow over her sister's death, believing that Juanita deserved justice. She felt that Tom's actions had forever impacted their family, particularly the loss for Juanita's children, who were left without a mother. In the first vote, the jury was divided. 7 jurors found Tom guilty, while the remaining 5 disagreed. During the resumed trial, the prosecutor presented a video reconstruction of the fall using a mannequin. The coroner described Juanita's injuries and mentioned one particular injury that seemed suspicious, a double bruise on her right thigh. This fact caught the attention of 2 members of the jury. The men stood up and decided to investigate what could have caused such a bruise. At one point, a journalist in the room nudged the man in the thigh, and the man immediately fell. Another prosecution witness, a former karate instructor, testified under oath that 15 years earlier, Tom had been on track to earn a black belt. Everything began to fall into place logically. A remote cliff location, a wife with leg issues, and a husband capable of delivering blows. It was highly likely that the testimony from the instructor was decisive, as after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Tom guilty of first-degree murder. In 2008, Tom was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The Richardson children sat in shock and tears. At the time, they were 19, 21, and 23 years old. The tragedy at Pictured Rocks had now taken both their parents away from them forever. Just before Tom, who was 50 at the time, was sentenced, Jeanette went back up to Pictured Rocks to listen to the wind one last time. She said, "I feel like Juanita's there, and I don't want to leave. I don't want to go home. Today the waves were just splashing, and it was beautiful, and last night the rainbow over Pictured Rocks just told us. She's saying, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm in better hands now." In the months following the conviction, Tom tried to appeal the sentence several times, but each time the appeals were rejected. Do you think Tom deserved the verdict? Let me know in the comments. That's the end of this story. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you like what I do, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you in advance, and see you next time. Goodbye.